you're starting with pen and you're trying to get used to it and shade with it, there's a few techniques that you can use. There's hatching, cross hatching, and pointillism. I'm going to start with hatching because it's a foundation for cross hatching anyway, so that's a natural place to begin. With hatching, for me, it's a downward stroke like this. I usually describe it like rain. Rain always falls in the same direction. We never have a raindrop that does like this and decides that it's going to go somewhere else. They all fall in the same direction at the same rate. So if you have lots of them and they're close together, it's a darker value. If they're spread out like this, then it's going to be a lighter value. The most common mistakes that I see when people are starting out hatching are looping. Sometimes they get rid of the loop, but they leave maybe little hooks. So I call that hooking. I try to watch out for hooks and loops and zigzags when you're doing pure hatching. As you're practicing pure hatching, it's not that you're drawing line necessarily. So I'm not just drawing lines, although technically that is what I'm doing. It's more of a muscle memory. It's a motion that I'm just repeating like this. And for me, this motion is what I've trained myself to do the best and be the most accurate. So when I try to hatch from the bottom up, I'm not quite as accurate. I'm more likely to have little hooks or inaccuracies or just not as consistent. So my challenge to you is to grab a fresh sheet of paper and about 1 inch, every inch or so, just make your little marks. And be scrap paper. Definitely don't use something fancy for this. We're just trying to develop a muscle memory. If you've ever scrambled eggs, then it's a lot like that. We don't think about every single stroke when we're scrambling eggs. We just whip them up. So you don't do this to scramble eggs, you just do this. So when I'm teaching this technique, that's what I really want to see my students do is develop such muscle memory that it's second nature. That's when you'll get a nice get in a consistent groove. My goal for anybody starting out would be to get about 4 inches of consistent, even spacing. And try your best not to get too many hooks. I don't use fancy pens when I'm teaching someone who's just learning because I don't want them to bruise up the end of it. But just grab a pen or a pencil that's around. It's really about training your arm. So I always start with just even strokes. See if you can make it all the way across a piece of paper. Then I try to do a value scale where I take my time and I try to make a really tight section, and then I slowly space out like this. So then I try to see if I'm consistent when I'm actually changing spacing. It's a little more challenging. So if you can do this, go back and forth with even strokes, a value scale, even strokes, value scale, and we want to fill up the page with that and just train our muscles to do that without even thinking. So I'll go back and I'll try to do a row of even. I am dragging my pinky against my paper That helps me to get a similar distance away from my paper. You can hear it kind of drag on this surface here. I'm not very consistent if I move a lot of my fingers. So I've seen beginners kind of try to draw those lines. The more joints and muscles and tendons that we take out of the equation, the better control we have. I'm basically moving at my elbow. Almost like a windshield wiper motion, like this. All right, well that's the essence of hatching. To make things darker, you just keep doing a little bit of extra. Just as if it were raining on a rainy day, the more rain, the darker. This is our low key values, and these are our high key values. So if we're doing a drawing based on those, then we would shade using this same technique. I'm going to make a separate clip with shading a three-dimensional object using this technique. But before you go into that, I challenge you to go ahead and fill a page, maybe even two, with hatching before you venture onto that. That way you're really trained up and you don't have to toil or think about it quite as much. We're going to use hatching to shade an object. It's one thing to get hatching down on your practice and get it to where you feel confident with your marks, but it's quite another just to start applying it to three-dimensional shapes. I have two examples right here. This one I did with a pilot pen, a gel pen, on some old watercolor paper scrap that I had. And you can see it's really bold, strong line. But with the gel pen, I struggle using it because the ink builds up right here. Just because I'm doing the same motion again and again, get a lot of ink buildup, and then every once in a while it will leave kind of a puddle of ink, kind of deposits randomly throughout. But I like how dark it is. With the triangle, the cone, I use just a everyday Bic, and I used a piece of copy paper, just a scrap piece that I had. So you'll see the difference in line. You can start getting a little more particular about what kind of paper you want to use or pen, but that's really the ones I've experimented with. So I'm going to show you how I did this cone picture. So I'm going to move these aside. I just wanted you to see what I was aiming for. So let's see. The first step to drawing this cone with a cast shadow, just draw a triangle. Okay. If it's difficult for you to make this balanced, you can use a ruler, line it up with the edge of your paper so that it's parallel to this edge. Kind of hard to see. Get our anchor line. We call that an anchor line. Then get kind of a round bottom here. So a triangle. Make sure that both sides are equal. When you're drawing in pen or you're shading in pen, remember to keep your underdrawing really light. We want the underdrawing to disappear eventually. Underdrawings, like underwear. It's useful, but we don't show it off. We like to cover it up. So there's some of my underdrawing. I'm going to give it a little cast shadow. I'm going to connect it right here, and then the other side's going to end right about there. Just a fraction of the way up. I'm going to pretend that my light source is coming from this direction, and it's putting a shadow down on this surface. So I think that if I wanted to map out my value, I would do that with like a dotted line with pencil. And I'd say I want this side to be my bright white side. Then I want it to slowly transition as it goes around the triangle. Sorry, the cone. And so I would start with a light value, maybe like a 1, and then maybe a 3, 5, 7, and then I'd give it another, maybe a 2 right here, just to have a little reflected light down here. Alright, I'm going to leave all these marks on here. When I'm finished, I'm going to erase all of my underdrawing. And if you did it light enough, it'll go away. Some of it you may not even see enough to care about erasing it. I'm going to start at the top. Might need to get my pen going. I'm going to choose my angle of my line. And I'm going to go over all that area at least once. Harder and harder as I stretch that line out to not hook. But this is going to be a pretty forgiving shape. Alright, you're going to see me go over this several times. This is where we have a lot of value change, but we don't have a lot of hard edge. So this is a soft value change. Call it a soft edge. So it needs to be subtle. So you'll see as I start layering and making several trips down this cone that I start shortening my line. So I'm going to start dedicating a little more time to this area so that you can start seeing that shadow get darker and darker. Trying not to hook, trying not to loop, trying to remember to stagger my line, to fill in some little gaps that I see if I miss a little spot. So almost just brush it on in those areas just to fill it in. Some people will ask me, why don't you just start with the really light areas? And I just feel more comfortable starting with the dark areas because they're forgiving. I can hide any mistakes with layers and layers of value. But the lighter the areas, the more this line is going to stand out. So if I had messed up this edge, I'd just make the whole thing a little darker. After all, it's just practice. I'm going to get in the cast shadow. Notice I couldn't get that back part. I'll go back and connect it, sew it together. There's a little seam there. No big deal. Just go over it several times. Got to get that pretty dark, this cast shadow. I'm going to use my cast shadow to shape up the base of that cone too. I haven't been counting how many times I went over this, but it's a lot. I've also heard students say, just fill that in, it's going to be dark. Miss Davis, what are you trying to do? Waste our time? Well, no, not really, but filling it in does not look the same as actually layering stroke after stroke of hatching. It just is distracting. your eye will go straight towards it. It creates kind of a awkward focal point just because there's not the uniformity in it. It just looks like somebody filled in a big space with pen. So, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I would suggest and encourage that you don't fill in space like that when you're really trying to use pen to shade. That's just kind of a lazy way out sometimes. So, and you know what? It is hard not to get lazy on this technique. It just takes time, and it can be quite tedious. It's not difficult, but it takes a lot of patience. And see, I'm just filling in some of these little spaces. Okay, this edge is tough. It needs to stay white, but I don't really want to start my line here and then pull it out from this edge. I feel like it's gonna look like I started there. It's gonna look like my pen is maybe have a little dot on the front of it like this. It just will have that start point. So I'm just gonna get some tape and I'm gonna tape up this edge just to keep it nice and crisp. Okay, so now I can just go straight through it, start on the tape, and let it come off. Just want a few layers on there, just to give me that edge. I think that makes it look a lot better. If you were doing a drawing and maybe it's a portrait that you're shading with pen and you have some highlights maybe on the eyes that you really don't want to mess up, just tape over them for a little bit. Just hide them away. You can even see that what I was talking about right there in this background. That's what I didn't want to happen at that edge. I want it to look like a fluid stroke was going behind it. Just a little trick. So, there we go. Some pens you have to wait. Oh, don't use that eraser. What was I thinking? That one's terrible. I used it earlier. Should have thrown it across the room so I wouldn't grab it again. So I'm going to erase this as if I never did any underdrawing at all. Try to trick everybody into thinking I just poured out of my pen. Just like that. All right. Well, I hope that you learned something in this video. I hope it helps you feel more confident when you pick up a pen and start trying to shade your own drawings. Feel free to practice any shape that you want, as many times as you want. There's no restriction. So, happy drawing!